Hello, Professor Carol Swain here. Back in 2002, I was ahead of my time, as I am frequently when it comes to some of the issues affecting our country. And this book, The New White Nationalism in America, Its Challenge to Integration, was published by Cambridge University Press. It was one of the leading presses in the world, and it was nominated by the press for a Pulitzer Prize, which it didn't win, but they thought the book was important enough to nominate. And the reason I'm bringing it up to you is that it has become so relevant. At the time that I started the book, there had been some high-profile incidents taking place where people shot and killed members of other races. And this was not white people, killing black people, but these were white, black, high-profile crimes driven by hatred. I was interested in why someone would hate another person so much that they would want to rob them of their most precious possession, which is their life in most cases. Sometimes it could be their children, but most of us are fond of our lives. I commissioned interviews with some of the leading white rights, white nationalist leaders of that day, and they were from most extreme to least extreme. And I wrote this book, and part of this book argued that there was a new white nationalism in America that would pose a threat to racial harmony in the future. All white people are being dismissed and labeled as white nationalists and white supremacists. Back when I did my research, we knew what a white supremacist was. And a white supremacist was a white person, and there were not many, white people like that we were aware of who thought that because of their white skin, they were superior to other groups. And back when I did my research, there were probably only 2,000 Klansmen, KKK members in the whole United States. We have found that with many extreme groups, a large percentage of those groups are FBI agents, undercover FBI agents. So by all accounts, racism was decreasing, but there was some racial animosity, and I wanted to know how these people became who they are. So I commissioned the interviews, and I'm going to read a little bit about the description of the book, and then I'm going to skip to my conclusions. So this was written back in the late 1990s, 2000s, published in 2002. I said, over the past 10 years, a new white nationalist movement has gained strength in America, bringing with it the potential to disrupt already fragile race relations. Eschewing violence, this movement seeks to expand its influence through argument and persuasion directed at its target audience of white Americans aggrieved over racial double standards, race-based affirmative action, high black on white crime rates that still exist, and liberal immigration policies. Multiculturalism and identity politics argue that racial and ethnic groups and also political groups should identify based on their group characteristics. They should celebrate who they are. And it says that every group can do this except white Americans. And what I was finding was that there were a lot of young white Americans that had been raised by around and with racial and ethnic minorities who were noticing the double standards. But I also felt that this book on white nationalism was the most important book that I would write in my life. And it didn't matter that my first book had won national prizes, been cited by the U.S. Supreme Court. I felt that this book, written right after my Christian conversion, was a book that was inspired and that it would be very important. And in my concluding observations and policy recommendations, I want to read to you what I said. And this was written, some time ago. We in America, I believe, are increasingly at risk of large-scale racial conflict unprecedented in our nation's history, which is being driven by the simultaneous conversion of a host of powerful social forces. These forces include changing demographics, the continued existence of racial preference policies, the rising expectations of ethnic minorities, and the continued existence of liberal immigration policies, growing concerns about job losses associated with globalization, the demands for multiculturalism, and the Internet's ability to enable like-minded individuals to identify each other and to share mutual concerns and strategies for impacting the political system. And that combination of conditions that I saw emerging that would create a devil's brew for racial unrest in America, I felt that what was developing was a white consciousness where white people are looking at other groups. They're seeing racial double standards. One of the things I found was that there were white people who said that it's wrong to discriminate against anyone. And they knew that it was against our civil rights laws, it was against our Constitution, but they said white people are being discriminated against. There's no one representing white people. And what I warned about and was concerned about back when the book was published is that the identity politics and multiculturalism drives Americans apart, and that if you're going to have a nation that can withstand and celebrate and its diversity, it has to be able to come together around shared values and principles. And that will not come from identity politics, but it can come from an American national identity. And so people talk about nationalism. There's nothing wrong with a nationalism that brings people together around shared values and principles. But when you focus on your identity, whether we're talking about your sexual identity, your racial identity, your gender or sexual identity, all of these things are not factors that will bring people together in a way that will be unified. And with the new white nationalism in America, it's challenged integration. Yeah, it was not beating up on white people, but it was saying that white people were not the same racists that you had back in the day when you had the KKK and you had neo-Nazis running around everywhere. There are very few Klansmen in the country. There are very few neo-Nazis. But there are lots of aggrieved Americans who feel that they are being discriminated against because of the color of their skin. And they are correct when they say that our U.S. Constitution and our Equal Protection Clause bans discrimination based on race, sex, national origin, religion, as well as other factors that have been added since 1964. If America is to stand strong, we need to look at who we are and what we're doing and realize that racial divisions, if we stir racial conflict, the bitter fruits of that can only destroy us. And when it comes to race relations, and in the concluding chapter of my book here, this big fat book, I have recommendations for our nation as a whole, but I also have some recommendations for Black people, because some of the problems that relate to America and deteriorating racial relationships can be laid at the foot of Black leaders. And at the time that I wrote this book, it was Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton. There are new racist leaders today. Unfortunately, many of the high-profile ones are in Congress, and that's very sad. What would be beneficial for America and for all of us would be leaders that tried to bring us together and not divide us. And so this book, published a long time ago, still has a relevant message. And I have to tell you that when I wrote this book, I was a Democrat, but I still was able to see that what was happening did not benefit the country as a whole, and that we would be better off if we jettisoned identity politics and focused on the American national identity.